As you may have noticed, there still hasn't been a devlog released on Guild Architect, something we've been planning for over 2 months to do at this point. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to wasting time and not working on the things that are the most important thing. That is, I think, the biggest thing that I can point towards, where we haven't always had our priorities straight. We haven't always been doing the right things with the time that we have and the deadlines that we impose to ourselves. And we want to change that. So to celebrate this change, I want to talk about 7 different ways that you can waste time working on your own games, not really making progress. And in Dutch, we have this saying, which roughly translates to standing still is going backwards. I don't know if it's an English thing. So I just want to go over some of those and then tell you which ones we've been struggling with Guild Architect. And this first one is partially applicable to us, but it's more of a general one where people, game developers, they spend too much time planning instead of prototyping their game. There's 2 approaches to this. Basically, the first one is, hey, some of you guys, they come to me with their game design documents and you're like, hey Marnix, what do you think of this idea? And then by the time that I get back to them, I'm like, hey, this is a good idea. I think this has potential. They're already like, oh, no. I've already made 3 new game design documents because it was never gonna work out, I realized. And I'm like, how do you know that? There is literally no way for you to know that it's not gonna work just from an idea on a piece of paper. Games are an interactive medium, and you could have just as well taken that and prototyped it. That's something that we've talked about before as well, where you just throw together something very ugly, very shitty in whatever engine you decide, or Fate decides for you if you can't pick, and just try out, does this work? Does this make sense? And if it does, okay, then we scrap what we made before and we start all over again, but now we think about what we're doing. If it doesn't make sense, then sure, you can go back to the drawing board, make that new game design document or whatever, and we can talk again. But don't spend too much time on planning the optimal game, but never prototyping your game, basically. You also get this on a smaller scale, within your specific game, where we have a lot of ideas for Guild Architect, and all of them have been planned out, or a lot of them at least. We've spent so much time planning, but we actually never prototype them. We never see, is this actually fun? Is this something that looks interesting? This is something that we've struggled with before with Guild Architect, but I think we're getting better at it now, where we spend too much time just planning on oh, these are all of our different mechanics and things like that. And we had this giant list, but none of it was implemented. That's also a problem I was dealing with the trailer, is there isn't much game yet. Because of that, now we're shifting more to, hey, instead of planning everything out, how about we just give it a go, give it a whirl, see if it works. One of the things that we've been working on is our gambling mechanic, for example. Just get a basic version of that working. Is it already a little bit of fun? Okay, perfect, then we can keep it and we'll work on it later on, but we won't just keep thinking about it. And then a second big waste of time is having wrong priorities. Because there are so many different components that are needed to make a game, but not all of them have the same priority. Not all of them need to be done in the first week or the first month of the game. And we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with that as well, because we had 2 art interns for 4 months who were graciously helping us, providing us with art, but they're gone now. Which means that all of our art had to be done already. So we got all the art done. But once again, there isn't much game yet, because we were too focused on the art. And sure, you can have a pretty game, but if the game isn't fun to play, it doesn't matter how pretty it is. Once again, this is a very common one we talked about in our meme review as well, of hey, let's focus on making the UI first before there is a game, because UI is much easier and much more visual to make than actual gameplay often, and it can be just more fun to crank out some UI and make it feel like you have a game, even though in reality you don't have a game yet. So once again, we're trying to remedy this by actually just making the game now. We've got our programmers, Thomas and William, on the case. It's just a matter of, hey, we need to look again at what is everything we need for Guild Architect, for if we want to do playtests, if we want to do devlogs, what is actually priority right now and what isn't. Because another example of this is our tutorial. I think a month ago, William started working on the tutorial, and I told him William, please stop what you're doing. We're not running a playtest anytime soon. We have more critical things than a tutorial right now. For example, being able to actually play the game once again. There's no point in making the tutorial if there's no game to make the tutorial for yet. So really take a look at your priorities and don't just do whatever is the most fun. I know it can be tempting to do whatever is the most fun, but because of that, you can often get into side quests and scope creep and not actually implementing your core gameplay idea, because that is the unsexy part of game development. Then a very quick one that I want to add on top of this, which I think we've been doing pretty good, is don't fix every single bug that you see. In development, there's so many bugs that are gonna be appearing, and so many of them are like very annoying, or they're gonna come back and things like that. Don't try and fix all of them the moment you see them. How we do it is we log everything that we see a bug of, but only like once we've gotten a big stack of like log tickets basically in our GitLab management software. If you're curious about how that works, there's a video over there. Once we have enough of them, like about 20, then we work through all of them at once, but we don't interrupt like every mechanic we make with like, oh, I need to fix this bug, and then this bug pops up. Like, bugs or something are always gonna come back, and if it doesn't actually like break the game the moment it triggers, then don't immediately solve it. If it's not critical, then once again, looking at your priorities, leave the bug for later. And then another time waste that I see, especially with you software developers who are like turning into game devs, is reinventing the wheel. There is no need for you to write your own localization software. We did that for Forge Industry as well, because we also were just like you. We're like, oh, we can program, we can make this ourselves. Yes, you can, but you could also just make the game. And there are so many assets out there for all kinds of engines that really, for a lot of things, there is no need for you to write an FPS controller from scratch, or to write an inventory system from scratch, or a localization system, save file system. All of these things have assets that are really good and that have had years of development and that have all of the edge cases as well filtered out. Whereas sure, you can probably make a localization system, like what we did for example, and it will work acceptably. But then suddenly your game hits production and there are so many different edge cases popping up where certain fonts maybe aren't supported, certain computers just can't deal with it. Those are things that you probably don't have the time for because you also still have to make the game. How about you just spend like $20 to $40 on an asset, and it's going to save you like literally countless hours that you could have just spent on your game instead. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of software that has been written out there already. There's no need for you to make yet another like implementation of a save system using JSON, for example. And then this kind of time waste is one that we once again don't have, but I do see it with a lot of developers, and that is like waiting for your game to be perfect. And this is one of those cases where it's Stardew Valley's fault basically, and Dwarf Fortress' fault, where it kind of sets an unrealistic expectation for game developers that, hey, your first game, you're gonna work on it for 6 to 20 years, depending on how long, but like, you're gonna work on it for a very, very long time. And then you're gonna release it and it's gonna be a masterpiece. This is the exception to the rule. First of all, do you think that you have the dedication to keep working on the same project like for 6 years? Stardew Valley's development cycle is not something to be romanticizing about. The guy just had his girlfriend fund his whole development basically, and all he did was make the game and then not be happy and rework it. You probably can't afford that basically. If you have that kind of publishing support called a partner who just funds everything, maybe. But I think it's much better to understand that, hey look, the first games you're gonna make are gonna suck, but there's so much you can learn from actually releasing that you're wasting more time trying to get your first game perfect and like spending 2-3 extra years on polishing it, whereas you could just release a game and then in those 2-3 years that you would normally be polishing your first game, just make more games and you will get better at it much faster because you see the entire process of releasing a game. You get to deal with feedback. You understand that, hey, maybe my vision of a perfect game is not what the audience wants. It's not what my players want. There are things you're gonna have to tweak there. If you're making a game that is perfect in your eyes, that still doesn't guarantee that other people will find it perfect as well. You're a unique being, so you could spend 10 years making the perfect game in a genre nobody cares about, in which case you have wasted a lot of time for no reason. And then to pull things to the other side of the spectrum, instead of eternally keeping and improving your game, you basically never start because you keep stuck in what's called tutorial hell. I've made a video about it before, so I'm not gonna go into it too deep, but it's basically the problem of, hey, I wanna make games, but all you do is watch videos like these about like starting your own game company, or all you do is like finding out what is the best engine. You get like 5 different courses for like Unity, for C#, for Godot, whatever, and you never make the game. And this is one of those things where you need tutorials, don't get me wrong, but there's a point where you're consuming too many tutorials and you're just better off making a game. I think the sweet spot for that is like, if you're doing like just watching tutorials for more than a month, you're doing something wrong. At that point, if you've been watching tutorials for a month, you should know enough to just get into bashing your own like crappy little game already together. And maybe that first little crappy game isn't something you're gonna release on Steam, but it's still going to teach you more to actually do something, to figure out for yourself how do these engines work, than eternally looking at these tutorials and never actually releasing something, even if that is just on itch.io. And then we have this last one, which is a bit sad, but I think it is still a very, very common occurrence in game dev time waste, and it is just not knowing when to give up. This is something you see kind of coming back from the previous one where, okay, I start making my 2D platform because that's what a lot of the tutorials are about. And you start making your 2D platform. You want to make something like a Metroidvania, or you want to make like a Hollow Knight. All fine and dandy, but hey, remember, if these are your first games you're making, you have no clue what you're doing. So you keep working on that 2D platformer, but then you realize, oh, there's so much competition. I put up the Steam page, I got 150 wish list. I did the next fest, I got another 50 wish lists or whatever. That's not good. And you've been working on this platform for like 7 months or something, and there is just no light at the end of the tunnel, basically. Then you're wasting time. I think that's like the point where, when do you give up? This is a very hard question, because when you give up, it also depends on you as a person, on what you want to get out of game development. Do you just want to do it as a hobby? Do you actually want to make money out of it, like what we did with Songs of Everjade? It's a hard decision, finding out when should you give up, but not even humoring the idea of, hey, maybe I should pack this up, is going to be much worse than just being like, okay, no matter what, I'm going to ship this game. If the signs aren't there that there's going to be anyone really interested in it, and it's going way slower than you expected, there isn't much point, in my opinion, to keep doing it. That's what we ended up doing with Songs of Everjade. We were gonna make a game that was scoped at 4 months. And after 4 months, we had barely a game, and we had barely any traction, and we had barely any interest. And if the goal of that game is to make money and be able to sustain us, and we got feedback that, hey, this game is actually not really looking that good, it's not that interesting, it doesn't make sense to keep working on that game and just to waste more time that we could have just spent starting a next game, doing some more market research, and then ending up with Guild Architect because it's a management game, it's what we're better at, it's what there's more demand for, and things like that. So I'm curious, how much time have you personally wasted on any of these different approaches? Are we talking about weeks? Are we talking about months? Or maybe even years? Like, you guys are often older than me. So I'm very curious to hear about you. Leave a comment down below. I always want to interact with you guys. I will respond to all of the comments you send. So let me know. Apart from that, if you're new here, we're game developers and we make 2 videos every week talking about the process of making our own games, the things we learn along the way, where do things go wrong, and we give you a really in-depth look into how to run your own studio, basically. If that's something that interests you, be sure to head down below and subscribe, as it really helps us out. I get happy when I see the number go up as well. I think only 38% of you guys are subscribed. So if you want to do me a favor and subscribe, I would really appreciate that. Anyways, that's all we had to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!